All right, so welcome again to Sunday Brunch. Before we get started, I just wanted to show you guys what I'm drinking. I've actually have 2 bottles of wine open right now because Tom has the Gewürz ready. So I would just like to share with you, of course it's gonna be probably backwards, but I have 2 Rieslings today. So this is a 2015 Riesling by Quensbas. Not sure if I said that right, but you can find this on wine.com. Excellent, excellent Riesling. And I also have Francois Bar here. This is a 2016 Riesling. And also shout out to Corvin with their new smart clamps technology, because now I can sit here and do a side-by-side with these wines, which is awesome. So let's get started. So basically, yay, Vince Bauer joined, which is amazing. So we actually have the producer here for one of the wines. So to understand Alsace, you have to understand its history and all of the nuances that that come with it. So, you know, vines flourished in the Rhine River Valley long before man was even there. And the vines became domesticated with the arrival of the Romans. And one of the things that is the craziest that I read was that wine shipments have actually been dated back to 2 AD. 2, like 1, 2, not 200, 2 AD. There's actually wine shipments from the region going back that early. So I thought that was absolutely insane. Although production temporarily halted in the 5th century with the invasion of the Germanic tribes and all of that, Christianity ended up expanding, and so did the viticulture, because right, you have all the church coming in, Christianity is forming. Let's plant the vines. Let's really domesticate things and you know, tame these things. Let's cultivate some grapes here. So moving forward, Alsace kind of reached its peak of prosperity in the mid 280, not joking. So Alsace reached its peak of prosperity during the mid-Renaissance. The names Traminer, Riesling, and Muscat appeared on tax records and were among the most expensive sought-after wines in all of Europe. So mid-Renaissance is when we're like really flourishing here. You have these grapes that are on tax records, and these are the most expensive wines in all of Europe. I mean, who knew? Hey Stu, thanks for popping on. So through the religious wars and the plague, the revolution, both world wars, these were kind of things that came afterwards. You see Alsace trade between Germany and France 6 times. So Alsace wasn't always from France. It went between France and Germany a total of 6 times. So you see these influences coming from both sides, and it goes back through all of these different wars and all of these different times. But as of 1945, it has been French. So since that date, Alsace has been French, and we call it, obviously, it's French wine. And so one of the craziest things that I read this story. If you guys are familiar with the Hugel name, I'm sure you are. If you know Alsace, you probably are familiar with Trimbach and Hugel. I would assume that those are 2 of probably, 2 of the biggest names that you have in Alsace. But the craziest story that I read actually in my French wine scholar book was during World War II, all of the men of Alsace were forcefully drafted into the German army. Most were sent to the Russian front. Well, it turns out the Hugel family of Alsace had 1 son fighting for either side. Hey, Philippe. So you have George, who's fighting for France, and you have brother Johnny, who's fighting for Germany. Well, it turns out that Johnny had been fighting near Lake Constance when he saw a French column approaching. He managed to escape, dress up in farmer's clothing. He got clothing from some random farmer, and he was rescued by the French army. So if he never made that move, you would have had 2 Hugel brothers literally fighting against each other in World War II. So I thought that was absolutely insane. Hey, English wine guy. Just give a couple waves to some of you guys here. So Alsace has become an amalgamation of both of these societies, and now they proudly reflect elements of each country. If you talk to people of Alsace, and I'm sure that there's some on now, they don't really identify as just coming from France or being French, or coming from Germany or being German. The Alsatians have their own thing going on. They're proud to be Alsatian, right? And I think that that is so great. And I think that there are so many great things about each country that comes together and creates these absolutely fabulous wines, these aromatic, punchy wines that go with a whole bunch of food and that are just freaking delicious. So that is my little spiel about the history of Alsace, because you need to know that, I feel like, before you start drinking these wines. So I'm so excited to dive in a little bit more here. We're going to get into this a lot more in just a minute. I'm going to bring on the wine director of Michelin Star Sepia and Proxy restaurants out in Chicago. She is a huge Alsace enthusiast, and her name is Jennifer Wagoner. And I'm going to bring her on, and we're going to have a great chat more about these wines. And you guys are going to be in for a treat, because you are going to leave this today with having a whole new appreciation for this region. So I'm going to go ahead and bring her on now. Thank you all for joining. Oh my gosh, I need to wave to all my friends. Hey!
Hello!
How are you?
I'm so great. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'm just going to turn up my volume here.
Sure.
I'm so excited to have you on today. You have been to Alsace. You have been a big advocate for these wines. So I know that you will give us so much great knowledge today.
Yeah, absolutely. I visited there in 2018. It was super memorable. And when I came back from Alsace, I became a huge advocate of the region, and created like a whole section of the wine list committed to wines from Alsace and introducing it to the Chicagoland area. So it's been really fun for me.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
So as I kind of touched upon the history a little bit in the beginning there, and since you visited the region, I wanted to chat a little bit about the German influences that you still see in Alsace today. So we know Alsace is French, it's French wine, but what are we still seeing here that's influenced from Germany?
So you see many, many things. And I think the combination of the French and German influence is so fantastic, and really resonates in many different ways. So language itself, you have, there's a language that people in Alsace speak that is a combination of both. You hear influences from both languages. So that's something that you just hear as you're walking down the street, which is fantastic. The cuisine itself, which, people like you and I are really interested in, and the wines, you see influences of both French and German. So you have, generous portions, obviously, but like delicious, like sausage and choucroute and amazing cheeses, potatoes, and just a lot of really delicious things that make complete sense with the wines that are being produced in this region. You also see the influence with the bottle shape, right? So the flute d'Alsace. Yes. So they make it super recognizable, but that's also another influence from the region that is just literally right over the Rhine. So it's really interesting.
Love that.
Yeah.
So we have the Vosges Mountains that are protecting Alsace from all these harsh westerly winds and westerly rains. And we have quite a northern latitude here. So how does this affect the viticulture, and what grapes are we finding in this region?
Cool. So Alsace, so you have the Vosges Mountains, and I like to kind of just create the scene when you're getting there. So you have the Vosges Mountains on the west, you have the Rhine River on the east, you have the Black Forest, beyond that. And the Vosges, I think one of the interesting things for me was that when I visited, I in my mind thought that the Vosges were like extremely tall. They're not crazy tall. They're about, 5,000 feet. So just enough that they protect this really beautiful region from all that, the wind and the rain there. But it's one of the driest and sunniest regions in France. So that's something that you have to consider, especially given its northerly latitude. You still have so many days of sunshine, especially in the summertime, that it kind of balances out the northerly climate. The vineyards themselves are located in the foothills they're like a thin strand at the foothills of the Vosges, and aspect and location is really important. So you have just at the lower mountainside, and then the foothills there. south and southeast facing. So that's kind of the optimum place to be, and eastern facing as well. And we're growing it's a lot of white grapes. So it's about 90% white production there. So that's what we're growing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's crazy because when I haven't been there, and actually I'm supposed to go there at the end of 2020. We'll see.
We all want to go somewhere right now.
We have a trip planned to where we really want to go check out the Christmas markets. And I had this vision of the Vosges Mountains being like absolutely massive, just like completely like blocking every cloud that could ever possibly get into. So that's actually really fascinating.
Yeah. That was like an eye-opening. That was very eye-opening to me. They're so beautiful, but they're not nearly as high as I thought they would be. And that was a really interesting thing just to be there and see it that way. Yeah.
Someone asked us to chat about the terroir. We're actually going to get to that in a little bit. But I want you to tell everybody a little bit about the noble grapes. So we know that Alsace has like these noble grapes and kind of how they express themselves in Alsace, because you can find these grapes elsewhere in the world. But what makes them so special here?
Awesome. So there are 4 noble grapes in the Alsace region. So the king of the grapes is going to be Riesling. And what's unique about the Riesling in Alsace is that, contrary to what some people believe, it's done in a very powerful dry style. And so that's one of the main points I think that I enjoy speaking about with guests working in a restaurant setting, is that introducing them to Riesling from Alsace is a completely different experience than maybe they had thought prior to tasting it. When planted on Grand Cru terroir, they can take on all these different personalities, tons of power. I know we're going to talk about terroir in a little bit with these questions, but length, structure, body, it can all vary depending on the Grand Cru if it's there. It's about 10% of the world's Riesling as well, and about 22% of the vineyards are planted to Riesling. So that's number 1, noble grape. Yes. Number 2, noble grape is Gewürztraminer. Gewürztraminer is it's number 2 in production, and it's close to 20% of their total production. The spicy Traminer. And I'll probably touch on it later because it was just so eye-opening to me. It is like the most beautiful wine with stinky cheese. Alsace, I'm going to keep talking about cheese because there's just a lot of really good cheese. So we had done a little tasting with stinky cheese and Gewürztraminer, and it was ridiculously awesome. A very, like an epiphany pairing experience. So Gewürztraminer, number 2. Number 3, Pinot Gris. Total production's about 15.5%. Can be full-bodied, very different from Pinot Grigio, which is in the Italian side very much more lean. This can be like, for me, and many of these wines are all about texture. So you have like a beautiful ripeness. You have the lovely aromatic, but just it's a textural wine. And I'll often refer to restaurants because that's my experience. But when speaking with guests about Pinot Gris, they're very pleasantly surprised if they've only had Pinot Grigio and are looking for a different style. Pinot Grigio is great too, but just a totally different style. So it's great with a lot of different foods. It's awesome. And then wine, the 4th noble grape would be Muscat, and it's a much smaller percentage, about 2.3%. And it's one of those things that's kind of funny because it's highly aromatic. It's done in a dry style. But when sommeliers or just people enjoying wine and food are often like befuddled with asparagus, if you ask people from Alsace about asparagus and Muscat, it's a match made in heaven. So that's a really fun one to pull out of your back pocket.
I heard white asparagus. Is that a thing?
Yeah, it is a thing. It is a thing. Yeah. It's actually making me pretty hungry.
Yeah.
Luckily, I have some Gewürz, so maybe I'll have some later.
And a bunch of people, I'm looking in the comments here, we're talking about Munster cheese and Gewürz.
Oh, delicious. I am just dipping my toe in this amazing world of cheese, but as I have like slowly experienced cheese like that, like Munster cheese and Gewürz, which was amazing, I can only imagine where it's going to take me with pairing. It's very, very exciting, and that region is really made for it. So
yeah, definitely. And I think it's funny that you bring that up about Pinot Gris as well, because I think we have, as I think in general here in America, we do have this preconception of Pinot Grigio being, mass produced from Italy. And there are some obviously beautiful expressions.
Yeah.
Like and all that kind of really high quality Pinot Grigio. But it's just very different here. Like you said, it's a little
Totally.
bit more aromatic and it is a little bit more mouth-filling. It almost has like an oily kind of feel to the palate, which
It
is
has weight. It's a
weight.
full-bodied wine. Like it could be very full-bodied. I mean, if people enjoy drinking like lighter style reds, this could also be a really fun kind of pairing. It pairs with some similar weights of food as well.
Absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. So, another thing that I love about Alsatian wine is just the diversity in styles, right? So you have these single varietal wines that are 100% one grape. Then you have blends, sparklings, reds, whites. But then you also go dry to sweet here. So how can somebody know when they're going to buy wine from Alsace if they're getting like an off dry wine or a super sweet wine? And how is climate change affecting this as well? So this is kind of like a loaded question.
No, totally cool. There are a lot of ways to kind of go about an answer because it's a deep topic and it's really interesting. I think starting with climate change, I think the main thing that you're going to see is just a change in harvest dates. So
Yes.
you might be harvesting earlier. So that's something to keep in mind. When you're thinking of everything's always in generalities, right? So there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. But you can consider that Riesling and Muscat are going to be dry, right? Pinot Gris and Gewürztraminer can have a touch of an off-dry quality to it, but Gewürztraminer more so. But I think it's also about kind of learning producers as well. There's different styles. And yeah, there's something for everybody, which is really nice. And depending on where you want to be in the scope, those are kind of general qualities. I think most people, since kind of Riesling is one of the varietals that people tend to go toward first when they're being introduced into Alsace, you can count on that being dry. So that's very helpful, I think, when people are looking into wines when they're picking them off the shelves in a wine shop.
Yeah, definitely. And then it also goes to dessert wines too. You can find dessert wines too
Also,
in that.
yeah, like thinking about more pairings, like foie and like a sweeter style wine. So if you think of like foie and sauterne, like the classic French pairing from Bordeaux region, this is like kind of a similar thing when you get into there are two kind of sections of the sweeter style wine. So you have the Vendange Tardive, and you have I always shorten everything. It's Sélection de Grand Noble.
Yes.
But my French can only get better. So it's SGN. And so Vendange Tardive, VT, later harvest, and it must be produced with the 4 noble grapes of Alsace. So they can have a bit of that honeyed characteristic. They can be affected by noble rot, by botrytis, which we see in Tokai and in Sauterne, if you want to think about botryticized wines. And so they can also be done really dry. So VT can be sweet or it can be very dry. So if you're looking into something like that, it's useful to look at to log on to these amazing, very informative producer sites and just kind of see where they are. With SGN, it's very much has to do with botrytis. So they're going to be sweet. They have super honeyed characteristic. Both of these styles have to be handpicked, but the SGNs are like several passes through the vineyard. I have not seen harvest for these wines in Alsace, but I was in Tokai watching them do the harvest there and watching how strenuous and crazy it is to go through and pick these botryticized, shriveled, amazing grapes. Among the bunches. It's not an easy feat, and it produces very little wine, which makes it even more special. There's not that much produced. So I also love botrytis, shitty wine memes.
Yeah.
It's a good thing.
Yes, it's so good. And so because you have to do all of these passes through the vineyard and you have to let, whether it be pastillage, I can never say that word, letting the grapes dry out on the vine, or you do botrytis, how late can harvest go? I mean, obviously we're picking a little earlier because of climate change, but how in Alsace, how far can we go here for?
I mean, are we thinking, I would probably need to ask some more winemaker friends. Maybe someone can chime in a little bit on later harvest. I don't want to speak to it because I'm not sure what it has been the last year or two, but I know there are some people on this chat that could probably give me a little bit more detail.
I actually think the producer of Francois Bauer is here, so
yeah, maybe they can. Yeah, feel free.
So sometimes when you go to the store and you're buying Alsace, you see these terms Elsviker and Gentile. What does this mean? What does this tell us when we're buying wines from here?
Cool. So with these two, they're a bit different. There's some similarities, but a bit different. The
Mhm.
Edelsviker is more of an everyday drinking wine. So if they're labeled with this, they don't need to be vintage dated necessarily. So if you think about it, this would be like your everyday drinking wine, right? They don't even have to be more than one grape, but they generally are blends. So it's a blend of varieties, not varietals.
Mhm.
And they're wines that are just meant to be drunk on an everyday sort of. I would drink it every day. And then Gentile is a little bit different. It's higher up on the quality scale in the fact that it has to be made with 50% noble varieties. So Riesling, Gewürz, Pinot Gris, Muscat has to be 50%. The rest can be other varieties, but the base wines have to be vinified separately. So I guess the simple answer to this is Edelsbicker, more a blend of varieties, doesn't have to be vintage dated. Drink as you will, like just you can have that every day, like a really delicious value.
Yep.
And Gentile just maybe a step up there because it has to be 50% of those noble varieties, which are very important in the region too.
Got it. That's really good to know. And so we have one large AOC that covers all of Alsace. We have one for Cremant, and then we have 51 AOCs for Grand Cru.
Yeah.
What qualifies a wine for Grand Cru status? What are these wines?
So Grand Cru was first introduced in 75, and now they're 51, right? And so if you think about how with this, with where the vineyards are situated and where these areas are, it's really important, especially with the different soil types and insane amount of combinations of soil types, that these Grand Crus be recognized for their differences and being special in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
They are low southern and southeastern facing slopes. They're only produced from the noble grapes. There are a couple exceptions. There are a couple Grand Crus that can do blends, and Zutzenberg, which can do Sylvaner. But in general, for noble grapes, and hand harvesting is mandatory, and the yields are more restricted. So in the way that you think of a quality pyramid, so you're seeing, as the quality pyramid goes up, and like Grand Cru is at the top, the yields are going to get smaller, minimum alcohol is going to be greater. It's just more special and more difficult to produce. So that's Grand Cru.
You have to love all the exceptions to the rules too.
That's why studying is so tricky. There's always something changing, and but they keep us on our toes. All of these wine regions keep us on our toes.
When I first started, I'm in the midst of my French wine scholar studies, and they told us, as a general rule, make sure you know all of those exceptions to the rules because they make for test questions.
Totally. They get you.
Yeah, I'm like obsessing over constantly obsessing over the exceptions because I'm like, I'm going to need to know that.
Totally. I think it's funny because, they're only a small percentage. And actually, I didn't even mention it, Grand Cru is only 4% of production. So think about, when you're thinking about studying or you're thinking about learning all the Grand Cru, super important. But really, in the grand scheme, it's only about 4%. Like, I think as wine drinkers or people that really appreciate it, we're very lucky to be able to taste these wines as much as we're able to, or as people have accessibility, I guess, in wine shops. Like, it's not a huge percentage of what's being produced there. So it's really special to be able to even have it at home. Yeah. I think people don't realize it. In this time of appreciating everything, which is kind of where I'm at right now. I really appreciate the fact we can taste it. It's very, very cool.
After we get off this call, I think I'm going to go online and just see like what Grand Crus I can find and just buy a bunch there and taste side by side.
Super cool.
Why not? And actually, before we move on to the next question here, while we're still on grapes, someone did ask if we could touch a little bit about on the red wines and the red grapes of Alsace.
So the red wines have been a little bit of a sweetheart of mine because I can't get a ton of them here in Chicago. I can get some, and I just think they're super special. Pinot Noir is not Grand Cru. It can't be Grand Cru because it's not one of the 4 noble varieties. I know some people are pushing for it, so and I hope someday to see it because the wines are very cool. But because you can get the Pinot Noir, it can be so ripe from this area due to all the sunshine. It just has a really beautiful balance. It has that, again, texture. And Pinot Noir has been one of those really fun wines to be able to sell to guests that didn't even realize that they were making red wine, had not seen it. And I have to say, when I visited, some of the Pinot Noirs that I tasted were, I mean, I brought some home and already drank them, or else I would show you some. But you know, it's always a fun thing to be able to introduce people to wines that they haven't had when you've experienced them. I think that's one of the best parts of hospitality, and that was one of the kind of the showstoppers for me. One of the things that I felt like was a secret that I wanted to like let people in on. So
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm a sucker for red wines from regions that aren't actually known for red wines. I just did a whole paper on the red wines of AOC Provence a few months ago because
Nice.
and those are just things that you just don't. And so same thing here. I've had Pinot Noir from this region. They're just absolutely elegant and stunning and really beautiful. And someone else actually just asked you, and I'm assuming that they're in the hospitality industry. They're asking, they want to know from you, how do you sell a Gewurz off of your list to somebody?
So Gewurz is one of those varieties that people are either like, oh yeah, Gewurz, or they're like, no, Gewurz. I think someone was associating it to cilantro recently, which I thought was really funny. People are like super into it, or they're like, but it leaves more for those of us that love it. And I think it's fantastic. And when I'm selling it to guests, it has to be food appropriate. I think that when you're thinking of stinky cheese, when you're thinking of foods with any sort of spice, my kind of introduction to Gewürztraminer was right when I don't even know that I was even into wine really yet, but it was right out of college, and there was a Thai place that was like BYOB. And the best wine that we could bring was a Gewürz. It had a little bit of residual sugar, balanced, that like aromatic bomb, delicious with spicy food. So I think it's like, you know, like any other service where each table is its own thing. Like if someone's adventurous and trusts you with pairings, I think it could really make their day. But it's all about reading the guest. And if it's one of those guests that's into trying something that's a really cool pairing, they'll be really impressed, and they'll become a lover of that wine. So
I agree. It's just really making the introduction.
Yeah.
Making sure it works.
Yeah, I think like, you know, just being a consumer in general, like, you know, before getting into wine or with many things that I don't know much about, it's a little intimidating. And so, you know, and there are varieties that maybe aren't here in the US. And so trying to like branch out into something is, sometimes you need someone to hold your hand a little bit and like,
Totally.
you know, introduce them. Like I was always excited when I had I have a lot of crazy wines at CP on proxy because I just get into it. But often I would just pour a taste. Like a guest wouldn't order it. I would just pour a little taste and say, cool, try this with what you're having. I think it's going to knock your socks off. And, you know, that's how you make believers out of people, because maybe they don't want to pay for that glass of wine because they might not like it.
Right.
But, you know, you pour them a little taste and they try it and they're like, now they're going to have Gewürztraminer or whatever that wine is the next time that they go out and feel like they know something that you don't know, you know, which is fun.
I love it.
Yeah.
So I have, and they're both actually almost gone. So I have two dry Rieslings here. They are from two different producers. Granted, they are from two different vintages as well. They are giving me two totally different things. One is giving me more of a honeydew, a little bit of honeyed, like ripe stone fruit. The other one is giving me a little more petrol minerality. I'm loving both of them. But as we talk about the terroir of Alsace, we know that there are at least 13 different soils that we find here. So how do these soils have an effect on what's in the glass?
So there are a myriad of soil combinations here in Alsace, which makes it really interesting. And for someone who just wants to learn, there's an endless amount of things that you can learn from the soil types there. So 13 mother soils, hundreds of combinations. The soil structure varies greatly from village to village. Mm-hmm. And so the steeper mountain slopes are generally composed of schist, granite, volcanic sediment. The lower slopes, more of a limestone base, and then kind of the foot of the mountains, more alluvial kind of clay. And this is like the most basic, like, right. You know, please read about it if you want to know a ton, because there's so much to know. So limestone can provide a little bit more of a lively varietal kind of expression and mineral notes. Volcanic can be a little bit more full-bodied, almost smoky. Granite, vibrant aromatics. Schist, a little bit more svelte and austere. And when you get the mix of all of these things in the individual sites, then you have something special from each area. So that's what makes the Grand Cru so special, specifically. But I mean, there are mixes of soil throughout the whole region. So there's something always new to experience. So the wines are going to be different. And I think it's what gives so much personality to the region as well, because it's not, it definitely isn't boring, and there's definitely a lot to learn.
Right.
So
It goes back to that whole idea of just the diversity. You know, so many people are, oh, Alsace Riesling, or you
yeah,
know, it's not even just about, you know, noble grapes and white grapes. It's about taking one grape from two different plots of land and having two completely different wines. It is so diverse, which I absolutely love.
yeah, it's really
Um,
cool.
So,
Yeah.
next question is so I've been seeing a rise of popularity in Cremant d'Alsace. What do you think about these sparklers and what makes them such an excellent value?
Cool. I think Cremant is super versatile, and it's a delicious wine that you can enjoy with or without food. It's done in traditional methods, so it's done in the same method as champagne, which puts it in a different category for value in general. So if you want some, it's a fraction of the price in most cases, and so it's something that you can enjoy on an everyday basis. It's got a really beautiful fruit quality. It's 9 months on lees and then 12 months in bottle before it's released. So it does spend a little bit of time. Um, I have it at both restaurants by the glass. I have some Camille Braun at both. And guests often have never heard of it either, in the same way that they hadn't heard of Pinot Noir from Alsace.
Right.
And so they feel like, they're being introduced to something that they can get at the store for $20 or less and have something, delicious, introduce their friends to it. And it's high quality. It's just not, it's not $60 a bottle. So, I mean, there's a time and a place for all of those wines, but I think that it's a little bit easier to have those on a regular basis than it is to have, some of the higher price point wines too.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing when I tell my friends that are just either starting to learn about wine or they're just curious about wine in general is
Yeah.
These wines are made in the same traditional method as the wines in Champagne. There's some different grapes involved, but that makes them interesting. And sometimes you'll find these Cremants are, even though they have like that slight nuttiness from being on the lees and spending a little bit of aging, but they are also very aromatic. I mean, some of the grapes that are in the blend causes them to be quite aromatic and like really pretty.
Yeah.
Great for sitting out. I just picture myself in the West Village on a nice spring day, sitting outside on the sidewalk.
I know. I know it's finally sunny here today. It's still pretty cold, but it was snowing for most of the week, so I'll take it. I should have some Clement outside porch and a coat.
Exactly. So before we get to the last couple questions, someone did ask if we could touch a bit about the organic vineyards and biodynamic vineyards. So since we have obviously such a dry region, this allows growers to produce organic and biodynamic wines.
Yeah, it's actually, I meant to talk about that a little earlier, but I often go on tangents. So organics with such a climate, it's no wonder that Alsace is one of the leading biodynamic and organic regions in France. More than 15% of the vineyards are certified organic. That doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of other people who are practicing that aren't necessarily certified, which is also something to consider when you're looking at certifications. But just taking from my own experience there, the idea of biodynamics, Alsace was really, it inspired me in a lot of ways. This one, I'll touch on the biodynamic part and then also the female in wine part. Both of those things were important to me from going to Alsace. But the walking in the vineyards, it was really interesting because, there were wild strawberries growing. There were bees everywhere. Like the cover crop was like, everything looked lush and alive. And as you're walking through and you think about, what do you want to be consuming? Because wine is something that you're consuming is basically a food. For me, it's, it's basically a food group.
Yep.
So,
literally.
Right. And so when you're looking at like, what do you want to be, putting into your body? And these things are like super lush, like everything looks very vibrant and alive. And I saw biodynamic and organic viticulture in a very different way that day. And just the difference between, the excitement and the vibrancy of life in the vineyards versus not. And I think that it's environmentally friendly practices are very important to me and the lists I put together and just life in general, because, we've got to take care of that earth. So I think that they're doing a really excellent job, and there's been even more and more of a push for that. And I find that to be very valuable from that region as well. And I respect that.
Okay, so, one thing to add on to that is where you can really where you can actually feel the differences is if you go to Champagne actually and you stand in a parcel that is practicing organic and biodynamic wine growing, and then right next door is a parcel that does not practice, you can actually feel the vibrations and the energy standing in that parcel, and then you can actually feel death. I hate to, like, that sounds a little bit dramatic, but like in the parcel right next door, it looks completely dark and dead.
Yeah, it's a real thing. I mean, if you take care of the land, the land's going to provide for you. And I think that that's just the cycle of life sort of thing in a very basic sense, you know?
Yes. Okay, so I'm actually going to skip to the last question and then go back one, because I'm super excited to ask you about this question. And we did talk a little bit about the food already, but we'll go back to it. So first of all, I'm so glad to have finally met you. I'm so glad that Drink Alsace could connect us, because I loved reading a bit about you and kind of the things that you have done. And I was so thrilled to see that you have created a wine list made up of female winemakers.
Yeah.
Only female winemakers.
It's pretty cool. So it's a female influence. So I'll take it back a little. Okay. So when I was telling you about how Alsace was really influential in me understanding what a healthy vineyard looks like, it was also very impactful for me in that one of the first events that I went to when I arrived in Alsace was a Devines d'Alsace organized sort of tasting, which is basically a bunch of amazing women from Alsace who are somehow in many different ways associated with the community there. They could be winemakers, they could be doing promotions, they could be family or whatever roles within the winery, and they bond together. And it's all these like super strong women. Some of them, like, Alsace has been producing wine for a long time. And a lot of these women that I'm meeting are like 14 generations, 13 generations. Like, there's history and there's value in this region, where it's like, it touches you in a different way because there's so much history. And so, a lot of them are, some are taking over from their father when they're the first woman. Some are, my list is female focused, and many female winemakers, but some of them are like the head of the household. Like, they aren't necessarily making the wine, but they're the ones that are the person that speaks about the wine, the person that's that's in charge, the owners of the winery. And so what I wanted to do is focus. I was doing a themed list for a while, and it would change like every 5 months or so. And so I did like a California list, and we had like there was a Loire list before I was there, which was really beautiful. So I wanted to do a women in wine list. And so I just started going through, and instead of changing it after, 5 months, 6 months, I decided that I wanted to keep it as a women in wine list. And then we just constantly rotate out in order to give women, a place to show their beautiful wines and to kind of have a story to tell to our guests without it only has a little blurb at the bottom. It doesn't say like only women in wine list. Like, right. Some people don't even know it's women in wine, and that's cool too, because the wines are awesome. But if they wanted to know, then they could ask, which is really great. So it can we're making hopefully everybody happy, A, by just having fantastic wines on the list, and B, if you're into that sort of thing, we can also tell a deeper story and represent something that's, important to me.
I love that so much.
Yeah,
that is super cool. I want to come just for that. Like,
I want you to come. We want to open right now.
When things open back up, like, I have a million plans, and that is definitely one of them.
Awesome.
And I actually read that in my studies too, which there's a lot of family wineries that have been operating now since the beginning of time that are still operating that way, like through the family. And they were saying in Alsace, it's more prevalent here than maybe anywhere else in France.
Yeah, it's just like super deep rooted. And I just feel like when you're there and when you speak to the people that are producing the wines or growing the grapes, or just people that are there, there's like this sense of pride in the region. There's a sense of pride for what they're doing. And it feels so genuine. So it doesn't feel contrived. It doesn't feel, like a business. It doesn't feel like you're walking in and like, hey, look at this kind of thing. It's like, taste the wines. This is our history. Yeah. It's not ultra fancy. You're not going to have these crazy wineries necessarily. You're going to have something that's been producing something very thoughtful and historically relevant. And that's what they have. Like, that's what their pride comes from, something really real. And I think that's something that's really attractive to me. Like, I've always joked, and it's true, but like, I want to represent wines and wineries that are good people. Like, the wines have to be awesome, but if there are two awesome wines equally, I'm definitely going to support the one with the good people. the wine has to be great, but also if I can manage to get to support people that are doing good things, that's what I want to do. And I think that Alsace has a lot of those people. So
I bet. I remember, and I 1,000% agree with that. I haven't had the opportunity to go to Alsace yet, but I did have an amazing trip to the Loire Valley last year. And you do find these amazing people that have been working in their families' wineries for generations and generations. And you taste that in the wine. Like you just
yeah.
taste the pride, just the heart, the soul, the love. And it's really amazing.
Yeah. Like you can't just make that happen unless it's there.
Unless it's there. It's not forced.
Yeah.
Okay, so finally, we did chat a little bit about food and wine pairings, but what about when you were in Alsace? What were some Alsatian food and wine pairings that were your favorite?
So obviously the stinky cheese
With your
and Gewürz, the sausage, like all of the delicious kind of meat was so fantastic with
yeah.
Riesling, with a Gewürz that has a little bit of sweetness to it, with Pinot Gris because of its like unctuous quality. Foie, and my friends always joke with me that I'm just like really like liver. But that and like an SGN. Yeah, that was my friend Amanda because I've traveled with her to wine regions, and it's constantly I'm always getting made fun of, but it's true. I just really like it. With VT or SGN, something with a sweeter sort of thing. I think tarte flambée, which is basically Alsace's version of delicious thin crust pizza, is great with Clément as well. So, I mean, I could drink bubbles and pizza. I mean, sounds kind of American, but I am American. But I think it's great.
Is the tarte flambée with the cream and the meat and oh my gosh, it's so good. Onions.
Yeah, and muscat and asparagus, of course, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, but that's also an amazing one, and one that I only really learned after being there. So.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I think it looks like we have a question here. Someone would like to know what your favorite estates are.
That's tricky. Not everything is available in every market, so it's difficult to say. I've had some really beautiful wines. The Francois Bauer wine that you had, I actually took one of their Pinot Noirs home from the winery, and it's meant to age, and I just didn't get that far. We drank it. It was really good. That's the hardest
thing.
It's true. There's some like the female producers that I love. I mean, we've supported Veronique Murray, Melanie Pfister, Laura Adam, who makes an awesome, the Cremant that's rosé is 100% Pinot Noir. And we used to sell a ton of that, and especially in the summertime from Laura Dam. She's lovely. Marie Zuslan, Marie Barthelme. There's a lot.
I feel bad. It's like,
I feel bad choosing.